My name is Amanda Richardson, and I'm 26 years old. I never thought my own parents would steal from me, but here I am, staring at a house deed with my sister's name on it. For 3 years, I've been paying their mortgage, utilities, and property taxes after Dad's stroke nearly bankrupted them. Every month, $2,400 disappeared from my account to keep their home. Tonight, they just announced they're giving this house to my sister Jessica as a wedding gift. The same house I've been sacrificing everything to save. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and family drama, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever dealt with family favoritism or financial manipulation, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself when family lets you down. Trust me, what happens next will shock you as much as it shocked me that night at dinner. 3 years ago, my life was completely different. I had a successful marketing career in Chicago, living in a beautiful downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I was 23, ambitious, and climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious advertising firm. My weekends were spent exploring new restaurants, taking weekend trips to New York, and building the independent life I'd always dreamed of. I had plans to buy my own condo within 2 years and maybe even start my own consulting business. Then everything changed with one phone call from my mother Linda on a Tuesday morning in March. Dad had suffered a massive stroke while working in his garage. The medical bills started pouring in immediately. Even with insurance, the costs were staggering. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, medications, and specialized equipment turned into a monthly financial nightmare that my parents couldn't handle on Dad's reduced disability income and Mom's part-time job at the local library. My boyfriend Michael, who worked as a financial advisor, warned me against getting too involved. He'd seen families destroy themselves financially trying to bail each other out. But watching my parents panic about losing their home of 30 years broke my heart. This was the house where Jessica and I had grown up, where Christmas mornings happened, where Dad had taught us to ride bikes in the driveway. When they called me crying about foreclosure notices, I didn't hesitate to offer help. The mortgage payment was $2,400 monthly, plus utilities averaging another $300. Property taxes added another $400 monthly when broken down annually. I volunteered to cover all of it while Dad recovered and they sorted out their finances. What I thought would be a temporary 6-month arrangement became my new reality. To afford this, I moved from my luxury apartment into a tiny studio with a Murphy bed and no air conditioning. I canceled my gym membership, stopped eating out, and took a second job doing freelance social media management on weekends. Jessica, meanwhile, was pursuing her acting dreams in Los Angeles. She'd moved there right after college with grand plans of becoming a movie star. In 5 years, she'd landed exactly 3 commercial roles and worked as a server at an upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills. She never offered to help with the family finances, always claiming she was just getting by in expensive LA. Mom and Dad never expected her to contribute anything, always saying she was following her dreams while I was already established. The family dynamic had always been clear. Jessica was the artistic, free-spirited daughter who needed protection and support. I was the responsible, practical one who could handle anything. Growing up, Jessica got dance lessons, acting classes, and summer camps while I was expected to get jobs and save for college. When she wrecked Dad's car at 17, they bought her a new one. When I needed a car for my part-time job, I had to buy my own used Honda with money from working at a grocery store. My best friend Sarah constantly reminded me how unfair the situation was becoming. She watched me skip dinners to afford the mortgage payments, saw me wearing the same clothes for months because I couldn't afford new ones, and worried about how thin I was getting from the stress. Michael became increasingly frustrated with my inability to say no to my family's demands. He wanted us to move in together, but I couldn't afford to split rent on a decent place while supporting my parents. The guilt calls from Mom became routine. She'd call crying about how Dad was getting depressed about being a burden, how they felt terrible about accepting my money, but then she'd mention another medical bill or home repair that needed attention. Dad would get on the phone with his slurred post-stroke speech, telling me I was their angel and he didn't know what they'd do without me. How could I say no to that? Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor, often commented on how much she saw me at the house, helping with yard work, bringing groceries, and handling repairs. She'd known our family since Jessica and I were children and frequently mentioned how different we were. While Jessica rarely visited, even before LA, I was constantly around, helping with everything from computer problems to holiday cooking. Mrs. Chen would shake her head and tell me I was too good to my family, but I thought she was just being overly protective. The financial strain was destroying my credit score. I was maxing out credit cards to cover my own basic expenses, missing payments on student loans, and constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul. My career started suffering because I was too exhausted to perform at my best. I was passing up networking events and professional development opportunities because I couldn't afford the time or money. Michael pointed out that I was essentially putting my entire future on hold for parents who seemed to have no exit strategy for becoming independent again. What hurt most was watching Jessica post pictures from expensive LA restaurants, weekend trips to Napa Valley, and shopping sprees while I was eating ramen noodles for the third night in a row. She'd call home weekly to chat with Mom and Dad, regaling them with stories of auditions and industry connections, never once asking about the financial situation or how they were managing. It was as if the stroke and its aftermath existed in a completely different world from her Hollywood dreams. The warning signs were there, but I was too emotionally invested to see them clearly. Dad's recovery was slower than expected, but he wasn't trying as hard in physical therapy as he could have. Mom had opportunities to work full-time but chose to stay part-time because it was easier. They both seemed to have settled into a comfortable routine where Amanda handled the big expenses while they managed small daily costs. When I suggested they consider selling the house and downsizing to something more affordable, they became defensive and hurt, saying I was trying to kick them out of their family home. Everything changed when Jessica announced she was coming home for a surprise visit in June. She'd been mysteriously vague about the reason during her phone calls, just saying she had exciting news to share. I was actually looking forward to seeing her, hoping maybe she'd finally step up and help with the family situation now that she'd been in LA for several years. I imagined she'd see how much I'd been sacrificing and feel guilty enough to start contributing something, even if it wasn't much. The night Jessica arrived, Mom cooked an elaborate dinner featuring all of her favorite dishes from childhood. The dining room table was set with the good china that never came out except for holidays. Dad had even gotten dressed up in a button-down shirt instead of his usual sweatpants. The excitement in the house was palpable, as if royalty was visiting rather than their other daughter coming home for a few days. Jessica looked stunning, as always. She'd had her hair professionally styled in perfect beach waves, was wearing a designer dress I recognized from Instagram fashion influencers, and her makeup was flawless. She hugged everyone dramatically and immediately started gushing about LA life, dropping names of celebrities she'd allegedly met and restaurants where she'd eaten. I sat there in my Target clearance outfit, exhausted from working both jobs, listening to her describe a lifestyle that cost more in one weekend than I spent in 6 months. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Jessica stood up during dessert, her face glowing with excitement, and declared she was engaged. She pulled out a ring that must have cost more than my annual salary, sparkling with a center diamond that caught the light beautifully. Brandon, her fiancé, was apparently a successful tech entrepreneur she'd met through mutual friends in the entertainment industry. They'd been secretly dating for 8 months and had gotten engaged during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Mom started crying happy tears immediately. Dad struggled to stand up and give Jessica a proper hug, his movements still limited from the stroke but his joy evident. I forced a smile and said all the right congratulatory words, even though something felt strange about the timing. Why had Jessica been so secretive about this relationship? Why hadn't she mentioned Brandon in any of our family phone calls over the past months? After dinner, while I was helping clear dishes, I overheard a conversation between my parents and Jessica in the living room that made my blood run cold. They were discussing wedding plans, and Mom was promising that they'd give Jessica and Brandon the house as a wedding gift so the young couple could have a proper start in life. Dad agreed enthusiastically, saying it was the least they could do for their baby girl who deserved happiness after struggling so hard in LA. I dropped the plates I was carrying, creating a crash that brought everyone running to the kitchen. When I asked about what I'd overheard, the conversation suddenly became much quieter. Mom explained that they'd been thinking about downsizing anyway, and it would be wonderful to have the house stay in the family. Dad added that Jessica needed stability now that she was getting married, and homeownership was important for building a future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked directly whether they'd forgotten that I'd been paying their mortgage for 3 years. The response was a masterclass in gaslighting. Mom said they'd always planned to pay me back when they were financially stable again. Dad claimed they'd never asked me to sacrifice my own life for them and that I'd volunteered to help temporarily. Jessica looked genuinely confused, asking what mortgage payments I was talking about. That's when I realized Jessica had no idea about the financial arrangement. My parents had never told her about the foreclosure threat, the medical bills, or my monthly payments. In Jessica's mind, our parents were financially stable homeowners who were generous enough to give her a house as a wedding gift. She had no clue that the house she was accepting had been saved by my sacrifices for 3 years. When I tried to explain the situation to Jessica, my parents interrupted constantly, minimizing my contributions and suggesting I was being dramatic about what had been a temporary family arrangement. They painted my mortgage payments as a small favor between family members rather than the significant financial sacrifice it had actually been. Jessica seemed uncomfortable with the conversation but didn't ask the probing questions I hoped she would. The rest of the evening was tense and awkward. I went to my old bedroom, which Mom had converted into a sewing room since I'd moved to Chicago, and called Michael to vent. He was furious on my behalf and suggested I should stop making mortgage payments immediately to protect myself financially. When I said I couldn't do that to my parents, he pointed out that they apparently had no problem doing it to me. Mrs. Chen knocked on the front door the next morning while I was having coffee in the kitchen. She'd seen Jessica's car in the driveway and wanted to welcome her home. During the conversation, she mentioned how wonderful it was that I'd been taking such good care of the house and the family finances since Dad's stroke. Jessica's face changed completely when Mrs. Chen started talking about how often she'd seen me there, handling repairs, bringing groceries, and clearly managing household responsibilities. After Mrs. Chen left, Jessica confronted me privately, asking for more details about exactly what I'd been paying for. When I showed her bank statements on my phone proving the monthly transfers, she became quiet and thoughtful. She asked why our parents hadn't told her about any of this, and I didn't have a good answer. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but then Mom called her into the living room to look at wedding magazines, and the conversation ended abruptly. That afternoon, I had a major argument with my parents about the unfairness of the situation. I laid out everything I'd sacrificed: my apartment, my savings, my financial security, my relationship stress with Michael. I explained how I'd been carrying their financial burden while Jessica lived her dream life in LA without contributing anything. Their response was that I was being selfish and jealous of Jessica's happiness, that family members help each other without expecting rewards, and that I was trying to ruin Jessica's engagement with my bitterness. The argument escalated when Dad accused me of trying to use money to manipulate the family and said he was disappointed in me for being so calculating about what should be acts of love. Mom added that she was hurt I would try to take away Jessica's wedding gift out of spite and that she'd raised me to be more generous than this. They made me feel like a monster for expecting any recognition of my sacrifices or consideration in their decision-making. I went back to Chicago that Sunday feeling completely defeated and emotionally destroyed. Michael took one look at my face and suggested we go for a long drive along the lakefront so I could process everything that had happened. As I told him the full story, he became angrier than I'd ever seen him. He said my family was financially abusing me and that I needed to protect myself before they destroyed my future entirely. The week after Jessica's announcement, I couldn't focus on anything at work. My boss noticed my distraction during important client meetings, and I knew I was jeopardizing my career at a time when I desperately needed job security. Michael suggested I gather documentation of all my payments to my parents, thinking maybe a clear financial picture would help me negotiate some kind of repayment plan or at least recognition of my contributions before they transferred the house. I spent my lunch breaks for 3 days going through bank statements, credit card bills, and electronic transfers. The numbers were staggering when laid out in black and white. Over 3 years, I'd paid nearly $90,000 toward my parents' household expenses. That didn't include the additional money I'd spent on groceries for them, home repairs I'd funded, or medical equipment I'd purchased for Dad's recovery. The total amount was enough for a down payment on my own house. Armed with this documentation, I called to schedule an appointment with the family lawyer who'd helped my parents with their wills years earlier. When I explained the situation to Mr. Patterson's secretary, she informed me that my parents had already been in contact about transferring property to Jessica and that everything was moving forward smoothly. I asked to speak with Mr. Patterson directly about concerns regarding the house transfer. The conversation with Mr. Patterson was devastating. He explained that since my parents owned the house outright after years of mortgage payments, they had every legal right to give it to whomever they chose. The money I'd contributed toward their mortgage was considered a gift in the eyes of the law unless I had written agreements specifying it was a loan. When I asked about the moral obligation to repay me, he said that wasn't a legal matter he could address. More shocking was learning that my parents had already started the legal process of transferring the deed to Jessica. The paperwork had been filed 2 weeks before Jessica's visit home, which meant they'd been planning this long before the engagement announcement. They'd lied to me about it being a spontaneous wedding gift decision. This had been orchestrated carefully while I continued making mortgage payments like a fool. I decided to confront Jessica directly, hoping she might be reasonable once she understood the full scope of my financial contributions. I called her cell phone and reached her at Brandon's apartment in LA. When I explained exactly how much money I'd paid and showed her the documentation via email, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd talk to our parents about working out some kind of arrangement. 2 days later, Jessica called me back with a completely different attitude. She'd spoken with our parents, and they'd convinced her that I was exaggerating the situation and trying to manipulate her out of jealousy. Jessica said she understood I'd helped out the family during a difficult time, but that didn't give me ownership rights to the house. She suggested I was being vindictive because I was unhappy with my own life and wanted to punish her for being successful in love. The conversation became heated when Jessica accused me of trying to ruin her wedding and break up her relationship by making Brandon doubt the legitimacy of the house gift. She said she'd told Brandon that I was the jealous older sister who couldn't handle her happiness and was making up stories about financial contributions. According to Jessica, our parents had confirmed they'd never asked me to pay their mortgage and that I'd insisted on helping despite their protests. When I asked Jessica how she thought our parents had avoided foreclosure 3 years earlier, she said they'd told her dad's disability insurance had covered everything and that the stroke hadn't been as financially devastating as I was claiming. They'd painted a picture where I was a controlling daughter who'd forced my financial help on them and was now trying to use it as leverage. Jessica completely believed their version of events. I realized my parents had been planning this betrayal for months, possibly years. They'd kept Jessica uninformed about the true financial situation while accepting my money, then positioned themselves as victims of my supposed manipulation when it came time to transfer the house. They'd effectively stolen 3 years of mortgage payments while setting me up to look like the villain if I objected to their decision. My relationship with Michael reached a breaking point during this period. He watched me obsessing over bank statements, staying awake at night researching legal options, and calling my family constantly trying to reason with them. He said I was destroying my mental health and our relationship by continuing to engage with people who were clearly using me. When I defended my parents and said they weren't intentionally malicious, just confused about the situation, Michael said I was enabling their behavior. The stress started affecting my work performance significantly. I missed an important client presentation because I was on the phone with a lawyer about my options. My boss called me into his office to discuss my recent distraction and declining performance. I couldn't explain the situation without sounding unprofessional, so I just promised to do better while internally panicking about losing my job on top of everything else. Tom Richardson, a family friend who worked as an independent accountant, reached out to me during this time. Mrs. Chen had mentioned my situation to him, and he offered to help me organize my financial documentation pro bono. He'd known my family since I was a child and was shocked to learn about the house transfer plan. Tom spent a weekend helping me create a comprehensive file showing every payment I'd made, including interest calculations and opportunity costs. With Tom's help, I realized the true cost of my sacrifice was even higher than I'd calculated. The money I'd spent supporting my parents could have been invested, used for my own home down payment, or contributed to retirement accounts. The opportunity cost over 3 years, including lost investment returns and career advancement I'd missed due to financial stress, was over $120,000. I'd essentially purchased my parents a house and received nothing in return. The most painful realization was that my family had never intended to acknowledge my contributions or include me in their estate planning. Jessica was getting the house worth approximately $300,000 as a wedding gift, while I'd receive nothing despite funding its preservation. Even worse, I was expected to continue being grateful for the opportunity to help and supportive of Jessica's good fortune. July brought wedding planning into full swing, and somehow I became central to all the arrangements despite having no desire to participate in celebrating what felt like a theft of my financial contributions. Mom called me weekly with updates about venues, catering, and guest lists, always emphasizing how expensive everything was and how grateful they were to have the house settled so they could focus on giving Jessica a beautiful wedding. The irony was painful. Jessica called me in early July with a request that felt like adding insult to injury. She wanted me to be her maid of honor, explaining that it would show family unity and help smooth over any tension about the house situation. She said Brandon's family was very traditional and valued close family relationships, so having me in the wedding party would make a good impression. I was shocked by the audacity of the request and initially said I needed time to think about it. The pressure to accept the maid of honor role came from every direction. Mom called crying about how much it would mean to Dad to see his daughters united during such a happy time. She said refusing would confirm Jessica's concerns that I was jealous and vindictive. Dad got on the phone with his post-stroke speech, telling me he needed to see his girls getting along before anything happened to him. The emotional manipulation was overwhelming. When I finally agreed to be maid of honor, hoping it might give me opportunities to speak privately with Brandon about the house situation, Jessica immediately started making demands about my financial contributions to the wedding. She needed me to split the cost of her bachelorette party, help pay for bridesmaids' dresses for the other girls, and contribute to the wedding shower expenses. Each request came with explanations about how tight their budget was for the perfect wedding they deserved. The bachelorette party planning revealed the depths of Jessica's financial disconnect. She wanted a weekend trip to Napa Valley with wine tastings, luxury spa treatments, and high-end restaurants. When I calculated the cost at over $1,500 per person for 6 bridesmaids, I said I couldn't afford it. Jessica became angry, pointing out that I'd been spending money on the family for years, so why couldn't I invest in her happiness for one weekend? I tried to explain that the mortgage payments had been a sacrifice that left me financially stretched, not evidence that I had money to spare. Jessica responded that if I'd been smart about it, I would have saved money by living at home instead of maintaining my expensive Chicago lifestyle while helping the family. She suggested my financial problems were due to poor money management rather than genuine sacrifice. The wedding venue decision added another layer of pain to the situation. After looking at several expensive locations, Jessica and Brandon decided to have the ceremony and reception in the backyard of the house I'd been paying to preserve. Mom was thrilled, talking about how romantic it would be to have Jessica married in the same garden where she'd played as a child. The guest list was extensive, with over 200 people expected to celebrate in the space my money had helped maintain. During a wedding planning meeting at the house, I attempted to speak privately with Brandon about the true financial history of the property. I thought he deserved to know that his wedding gift came with a complicated backstory of my contributions. I cornered him while Jessica was showing her dress to Mom and started explaining about the mortgage payments and financial documentation I could show him. Jessica walked in during my conversation with Brandon and immediately accused me of trying to sabotage their relationship with lies about the house. She told Brandon I'd been jealous of her engagement from the beginning and was making up stories about financial contributions to get attention. Brandon looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to be in the middle of a family dispute. Jessica demanded he choose to believe her over my manipulation. The confrontation escalated when Jessica started crying and claiming I'd been threatening to ruin her wedding if she didn't give me money. She said I'd been harassing our parents for months, demanding payment for help they'd never asked for, and now I was trying to destroy her relationship because I couldn't stand seeing her happy. Mom and Dad rushed in and supported Jessica's version completely, expressing shock that I would try to poison Brandon against their generous gesture. Brandon left the house shortly after, saying he needed time to process what he'd heard. Jessica blamed me entirely for his discomfort and said if he called off the wedding, she'd never forgive me. Mom and Dad were furious, threatening to cut me out of the family entirely if I continued spreading lies about them to Brandon. They portrayed themselves as victims of my increasingly erratic behavior and financial demands. The extended family started hearing Jessica's version of events through Mom's phone calls to relatives. Aunt Patricia called me directly to express disappointment that I was being so difficult during Jessica's happy time. She'd been told I was demanding money from my parents and trying to break up Jessica's engagement out of jealousy. Uncle Davis echoed similar sentiments, saying the family was concerned about my apparent mental health issues and financial obsession. My relationship with Michael suffered even more during this period. He watched me spending money I didn't have on bachelorette party expenses and wedding shower gifts while continuing to make mortgage payments to my parents. When I explained that I had to maintain family relationships for my own long-term well-being, he said I was choosing my family's comfort over our relationship and my own financial security. The wedding shower was a particularly painful experience. I spent $600 I couldn't afford on decorations, food, and gifts while listening to relatives praise my parents for their generosity in giving Jessica such a meaningful wedding present. Several people commented on what wonderful parents they were to sacrifice their own home for their daughter's happiness. No one knew the real story of whose sacrifice had made it possible. Jessica gave a tearful speech at the shower about how grateful she was for parents who'd always supported her dreams and given her everything she needed to succeed in life. She talked about how the house represented their love and belief in her future with Brandon. Meanwhile, I smiled and clapped while internally calculating that the decorations around me had been purchased with the last of my available credit. The final insult came when Jessica privately asked me to consider giving her and Brandon a substantial cash wedding gift to help with their honeymoon expenses. She suggested that since I'd been living rent-free while helping with family expenses, I should have extra money available for their special occasion. The complete disconnect from reality in that request left me speechless. I was being asked to give more money to celebrate my own financial exploitation. Early August brought a discovery that shattered what little faith I had left in my family's integrity. While helping Mom organize Dad's medical paperwork, I found documents showing they'd been selling family heirloom jewelry over the past 6 months to fund wedding expenses. These were pieces that had been promised to me since childhood, including my grandmother's engagement ring and a pearl necklace that was supposed to be passed down to the eldest daughter. When I confronted Mom about the jewelry sales, she became defensive and said they'd needed money for Jessica's wedding expenses and hadn't wanted to burden me with additional costs. I pointed out that the jewelry was supposed to be mine according to family tradition, and selling it without discussing it with me felt like another betrayal. Mom said circumstances had changed and Jessica needed the financial support more than I needed old jewelry. The conversation revealed that Jessica had been calling regularly to ask for money for various wedding expenses. Each time she called crying about costs they couldn't afford, Mom and Dad would sell another piece of jewelry or take out another small loan. They'd been keeping this from me while accepting my monthly mortgage payments, essentially double-dipping on financial support while claiming they were barely getting by. Uncle Davis, Dad's brother, reached out to me with information that explained even more of the deception. He'd been approached by my parents for a loan against the house, using my payment history as evidence that the mortgage was being reliably covered. They'd essentially used my financial contributions as collateral for additional borrowing without my knowledge or consent. The loan money had gone toward wedding expenses and Jessica's living costs in LA. The revelation about Jessica's pregnancy came during a family dinner in mid-August that I'd reluctantly attended. Jessica made the announcement with Brandon beside her, glowing as she described their plans for starting a family. The timing seemed convenient, coming just as Brandon had been asking more questions about the house transfer. Mom and Dad were overjoyed, talking about how the house was even more perfect now since their grandchild would grow up there. Jessica's pregnancy announcement effectively ended any chance of Brandon questioning the house gift. He was completely focused on providing for his growing family and grateful to have housing security. When I tried to have another conversation with him about the financial history, he said Jessica was stressed about the pregnancy and didn't need family drama affecting her health. He asked me to let the house issue go for the sake of his fiancé and unborn child. The manipulation of Brandon through the pregnancy announcement was masterful. Jessica had positioned herself as a vulnerable expectant mother who needed protection from her jealous sister's financial demands. Any attempt I made to discuss the mortgage payments looked like harassment of a pregnant woman. The family rallied around Jessica's need for stability and peace during this important time, making me the villain for continuing to bring up money. My mental health was deteriorating rapidly under the combined stress of financial pressure, family betrayal, and relationship problems. I'd started having panic attacks before family phone calls and was losing weight from anxiety. Michael noticed my declining condition and suggested I needed professional help to deal with what he called financial abuse from my family. I was too proud to admit he was right. The breaking point came when I received a call from my credit card company about missed payments that were affecting my credit score. Between the mortgage payments to my parents and the wedding expenses, I was maxing out credit cards and falling behind on my own financial obligations. I realized I was heading toward bankruptcy while my family planned a lavish wedding with money they'd extracted from me through various means. Mrs. Chen approached me during one of my weekend visits to the house, expressing concern about how thin and tired I looked. She said she'd been watching the family dynamics for months and was worried about how much I was sacrificing without receiving any recognition. She offered to write a letter documenting what she'd witnessed regarding my contributions to the household, thinking it might help if I needed legal proof of my support. The letter Mrs. Chen provided was incredibly detailed and damaging to my parents' narrative. She'd kept track of when I was at the house, what repairs I'd funded, when I brought groceries, and how often Jessica visited in comparison. She documented conversations she'd overheard about financial stress and my contributions. Most importantly, she'd witnessed the transformation from a family in crisis to one stable enough to plan an expensive wedding. Tom, the family friend who'd helped organize my financial documentation, suggested I needed to make a choice between protecting my family relationships and protecting my financial future. He'd seen the credit damage I was accumulating and warned that continuing the current path would destroy my ability to buy my own home, qualify for loans, or build retirement savings. The opportunity cost was becoming catastrophic. My work performance continued declining as the stress affected my ability to concentrate and make decisions. I'd missed important deadlines, made errors in client presentations, and was clearly struggling to maintain my usual standards. My boss called me in for another conversation about my recent performance issues, this time suggesting I might benefit from taking some personal time to address whatever was affecting my work. The final blow came when I learned that Mom had been telling extended family members that I was experiencing mental health problems and becoming obsessive about money. She'd positioned my legitimate financial concerns as symptoms of instability, suggesting that stress from my demanding Chicago lifestyle had made me paranoid about family relationships. Several relatives had been told to expect erratic behavior from me and to be patient while I worked through my issues. Jessica's behavior became increasingly hostile as the wedding approached. She'd started recording our conversations when I tried to discuss the house situation, claiming she needed evidence of my harassment in case legal action became necessary. She told me she was documenting my attempts to extort money from the family and interfere with her relationship. The recordings were apparently being shared with Brandon's family to explain any tension they might observe. The pregnancy also provided Jessica with a new angle for financial requests. She needed money for maternity clothes, prenatal vitamins, doctor visits not covered by insurance, and special foods for morning sickness. Each request came with emotional appeals about the health of her unborn child and the stress that financial worry was causing. Mom and Dad continued selling family belongings to meet these demands while I maintained the mortgage payments. By late August, I was essentially supporting 3 generations of my family while watching my own life fall apart. I was paying for my parents' housing, contributing to Jessica's wedding and pregnancy expenses, and receiving nothing but criticism for my efforts. Michael had started talking about needing space in our relationship, saying he couldn't watch me destroy yourself for people who didn't appreciate the sacrifice. The week before Jessica's wedding brought revelations that destroyed any remaining hope I had for family reconciliation. While reviewing my credit report for loan applications, I discovered that my parents had used my credit history and income information to refinance their house without my knowledge or consent. They'd essentially committed financial fraud by representing me as a co-borrower while keeping me unaware of the legal obligations they'd created in my name. The refinancing documents, which I obtained through the mortgage company, showed that my 3 years of payment history had been used as evidence of my commitment to the property. The new loan was for $60,000 more than the original mortgage balance, with the extra money being used for home improvements and wedding expenses. I was legally responsible for a debt I'd never agreed to take on, for money I'd never received. Confronting my parents about the fraudulent refinancing led to the most explosive argument in our family's history. They claimed they'd mentioned the paperwork to me during one of our phone conversations and that I'd given verbal consent. When I demanded to see the documents with my signature, they couldn't produce them because they'd forged my name on the co-borrower applications. The criminal nature of their actions was undeniable. Dad suffered what appeared to be another medical crisis during our argument, clutching his chest and claiming heart palpitations brought on by my accusations. Mom called paramedics while screaming at me that my selfishness and greed were literally killing my father. The ambulance arrived to find Dad's vital signs normal, but he was admitted for observation anyway. The hospital incident became another weapon against me, with family members told that my harassment had caused Dad's latest health scare. Jessica's reaction to learning about the fraudulent refinancing was to side completely with our parents, claiming I must have given consent and forgotten about it due to the stress I'd been under. She suggested that my mental health problems were affecting my memory and perception of events. She refused to acknowledge that our parents had committed identity theft and financial fraud, instead focusing on how my accusations were damaging the family during her wedding week. The wedding rehearsal dinner became a public humiliation designed to isolate me from any potential allies in the extended family. Jessica gave a speech thanking our parents for their sacrifices and generosity, specifically mentioning how they'd given up their beloved family home to provide her and Brandon with stability for raising their child. Several relatives approached me afterward to express concern about my apparent inability to be happy for my sister during her special time. Mom's manipulation reached new heights when she pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner to inform me that she'd been in contact with Michael about my recent behavior. She'd called him to express concern about my mental health and financial obsessions, suggesting that my family relationships were suffering because of stress-related paranoia. She'd positioned herself as a worried mother seeking help for her troubled daughter, completely inverting the reality of who was victimizing whom. The conversation with Michael that followed was devastating. He'd been told by my mother that I was becoming increasingly unstable and making false accusations against family members who were trying to help me. Mom had suggested that my claims about mortgage payments and financial fraud were delusions brought on by work stress and relationship pressure. Michael admitted he'd started questioning my version of events after talking with her. When I showed Michael the financial documentation and refinancing fraud evidence, he was shocked by the extent of my family's deception. However, the damage to our relationship was already done. He said he couldn't continue dating someone whose family was this destructive and manipulative, and he was concerned about what other lies or half-truths I might have told him. The breakup felt like losing the last person who understood what I was going through. The night before the wedding, I had a complete emotional breakdown that required brief hospitalization for exhaustion and anxiety. The combination of financial stress, family betrayal, relationship loss, and work pressure had pushed me beyond my limit. I spent the night in the emergency room receiving 4 fluids and mild sedation while my family went ahead with final wedding preparations without me. Jessica visited me in the hospital the next morning, ostensibly to check on my condition but actually to gloat about how my behavior had finally proven her point about my mental instability. She brought flowers and spoke in a caring voice while secretly recording our conversation on her phone. She led me to make statements about feeling overwhelmed and confused, which she later used as evidence of my deteriorating mental condition. The recorded hospital conversation became a weapon against my credibility. Jessica shared edited portions with family members, focusing on moments where I sounded exhausted and emotional rather than the parts where I coherently explained the financial fraud. She presented the recording as proof that I was having a mental health crisis and couldn't be trusted to accurately remember or interpret events. During my hospital stay, my parents moved forward with final preparations to transfer the house deed to Jessica and Brandon immediately after the wedding ceremony. They also filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I'd been harassing them about money and making threats related to the property transfer. The legal documents painted me as an unstable individual who was fixated on financial gain and posed a potential threat to Jessica's safety. The restraining order was based entirely on Jessica's recordings and my parents' statements about my recent behavior. No one from my side of the story was consulted, and the financial fraud evidence was dismissed as further proof of my obsessive delusions. The legal system accepted their portrayal of me as a mentally unstable woman making false claims against generous family members. By the time I was released from the hospital, the wedding was over, the house had been transferred, and I was legally prohibited from contacting my family or approaching their property. I'd lost my family, my relationship, my financial security, my mental health, and any legal recourse for recovering the money I'd contributed. The 3-year nightmare had culminated in total destruction of my life while Jessica began her fairy tale marriage in the house I'd saved. September marked the beginning of my resurrection from the ashes of betrayal. My best friend Sarah helped me move my few remaining possessions into her spare bedroom after I'd been evicted from my Chicago apartment for missed rent payments. Living with her gave me the stability I needed to start planning my comeback instead of just surviving each day. For the first time in months, I had someone who believed my version of events and supported my need for justice. Sarah's background as a paralegal proved invaluable in understanding my legal options despite the restraining order limitations. She helped me research financial fraud laws, identity theft remedies, and civil litigation possibilities. We discovered that the statute of limitations for the crimes my parents had committed gave me several years to pursue legal action once I had proper representation and evidence compiled correctly. Tom Richardson, the family accountant, contacted me through Sarah to offer continued assistance with building my case. He'd been horrified to learn about the fraudulent refinancing and wanted to help expose the financial crimes my parents had committed. Working together, we created a comprehensive timeline of every transaction, every forged document, and every instance of deception that had occurred over 3 years of my support. The documentation Tom helped compile was devastating to my family's narrative. Bank records proved every payment I'd made, credit reports showed the unauthorized accounts opened in my name, and mortgage documents revealed the forged signatures and falsified income information. We had evidence of criminal fraud that could result in federal charges if properly prosecuted by law enforcement. Mrs. Chen provided additional support by agreeing to give a sworn affidavit detailing everything she'd witnessed regarding my contributions to the household and my parents' deception about the financial situation. Her testimony as an independent neighbor observer carried significant weight because she had no financial stake in the outcome and had known the family for decades. My investigation into Brandon's background revealed information that might make him more receptive to learning the truth about his wedding gift. His family had built their wealth through ethical business practices and were known for their integrity in professional dealings. They'd been involved in charity work focused on financial literacy and protecting vulnerable people from economic abuse. Brandon himself had written articles about financial transparency in relationships. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Brandon had hired his own lawyer to review the house transfer documents as part of standard due diligence for accepting such a large gift. His attorney had found irregularities in the property history and was asking questions about the recent refinancing and payment sources. Brandon was becoming suspicious about the true financial situation even without my input. Through careful online research and public records searches, I learned that Jessica's pregnancy announcement had been fabricated to manipulate Brandon into accepting the house gift without further questions. Medical records I obtained through a private investigator showed no evidence of pregnancy, and pharmacy records revealed purchases of fake pregnancy supplements and padding rather than prenatal vitamins. The fake pregnancy discovery provided the leverage I needed to approach Brandon's family attorney with information about the broader pattern of deception. I contacted the law firm representing Brandon's interests and provided them with comprehensive evidence of financial fraud, forged documents, and manufactured emergencies designed to manipulate their client into marriage and property acceptance. Brandon's family lawyer was immediately interested in the evidence I provided because it suggested their client was being defrauded through an elaborate long-term scheme. The attorney agreed to investigate the situation further and potentially pursue criminal charges against my parents and Jessica for conspiracy to commit fraud. Having legal representation with resources and motivation gave me hope for the first time in months. My new job search was successful thanks to my work experience and references from colleagues who respected my professional abilities despite my recent personal struggles. I found a position with a crisis management firm that valued my experience handling difficult situations and working under pressure. Ironically, my family crisis had prepared me perfectly for helping other people navigate their own disasters. The crisis management job provided both financial stability and psychological healing. Working with clients who'd experienced betrayal, financial abuse, and family manipulation helped me understand that my situation wasn't unique and that recovery was possible. My colleagues became a support system that understood the complexity of family trauma and the long process of rebuilding trust in relationships. Planning my strategic approach to exposing the truth became a form of therapy. Sarah and Tom helped me organize a comprehensive presentation that would reveal the full scope of my family's deception to every person who'd been told lies about my mental health and financial motivations. We prepared documentation packages for extended family members, Brandon's family, and community members who'd attended the wedding. The timing of my revelation needed to be perfect to maximize impact while minimizing legal risks from the restraining order. Sarah researched ways to share information publicly without directly contacting my family members, focusing on social media platforms, community bulletin boards, and mutual acquaintances who could spread the truth organically without violating court orders. 6 weeks after Jessica's wedding, I learned that cracks were already appearing in her perfect fairy tale. Brandon had been asking increasingly pointed questions about the family finances and the house history. His own financial advisor had recommended a full property audit after discovering inconsistencies in the deed transfer documents. Jessica was struggling to maintain her lies under professional scrutiny from people who understood real estate and financial law. The opportunity for justice came when Brandon's family decided to host a belated wedding reception for extended family and business associates who hadn't attended the original ceremony. Jessica was planning an elaborate party at the house, expecting over 100 guests including Brandon's wealthy family members and professional connections. The event would be catered, professionally photographed, and extensively documented on social media. My strategic plan involved creating a multimedia presentation disguised as a loving tribute to Amanda's 3 years of love and support. Sarah helped me compile photos, bank statements, medical bills, and documentation into a slideshow that told the complete story of my financial sacrifices and my family's systematic deception. The presentation was designed to look like a heartfelt family memory project rather than an exposé. Tom Richardson agreed to attend the reception as Mrs. Chen's guest, carrying a laptop with the presentation ready to display. Mrs. Chen had been invited by my parents, who wanted to maintain appearances with longtime neighbors. Her presence provided the perfect cover for introducing evidence about the true history of the house and my contributions to its preservation. The timing was crucial because Brandon's parents had already hired attorneys to investigate irregularities in the property transfer. They'd discovered the fraudulent refinancing and were asking questions about the source of mortgage payments over the previous 3 years. My presentation would provide answers to questions they were already asking while exposing the full scope of deception. 3 days before the reception, Brandon confronted Jessica about discrepancies his lawyer had found in the house documents. The mortgage payment history didn't match her parents' claimed income, and there were unexplained financial transactions that suggested someone else had been supporting the property. Jessica's attempts to explain the irregularities only created more suspicion about what she was hiding. The night of the reception, I positioned myself across the street from the house with a clear view of the backyard where the party was taking place. Sarah monitored social media posts from guests to track the timing of events. Tom had agreed to introduce the slideshow during the toasts, presenting it as a surprise tribute to family bonds and sacrifice that the hosts had prepared. When Tom stood up to present Amanda's tribute, the initial reaction from guests was positive. The slideshow began with heartwarming photos of family gatherings and childhood memories before transitioning into documentation of Dad's stroke, medical bills, and the family's financial crisis. Bank statements appeared on screen showing monthly transfers from my account to my parents, totaling nearly $100,000 over 3 years. The revelation that Jessica's wedding gift house had been saved by her sister's financial sacrifices created immediate shock among the guests. Brandon's family members were particularly outraged, having been told that my parents had generously given up their paid-off family home to help the young couple start their life together. Learning that the house had been preserved through my bankruptcy-inducing payments changed the entire narrative. Jessica's reaction was to claim the slideshow was a malicious fabrication created by her mentally unstable sister who was obsessed with ruining her happiness. She tried to convince Brandon that I'd doctored bank statements and fabricated evidence as part of an elaborate scheme to destroy their marriage. Her protests became increasingly hysterical as guests examined the documentation and realized its authenticity. Brandon's confrontation with Jessica about the lies became a public spectacle when she couldn't answer his questions about why she'd hidden my financial contributions. His family's lawyer was at the reception and immediately recognized the legal implications of the fraudulent house transfer. The lawyer announced that criminal charges would likely be filed for identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud Brandon's family. My parents' reaction to the exposed truth was a combination of health emergencies and dramatic denials. Dad claimed chest pains and collapsed in front of guests, though paramedics found his vital signs normal. Mom screamed about family loyalty and accused me of destroying Jessica's life out of jealous revenge. Neither could address the documented evidence of their financial crimes. The most dramatic moment came when Jessica was confronted with evidence that her pregnancy had been fabricated. Brandon's family lawyer presented pharmacy records showing purchases of fake pregnancy padding, theatrical makeup for morning sickness effects, and fake medical documents. The pregnancy announcement that had sealed Brandon's acceptance of the house gift was revealed as an elaborate hoax. Brandon's family immediately called off all wedding-related celebrations and announced they were pursuing legal action for fraud and emotional manipulation. Brandon himself was devastated to learn that both his marriage and impending fatherhood had been built on lies designed to steal property that belonged to someone else. The fairy tale marriage collapsed publicly in front of 100 witnesses. The local police were called when guests began arguing about whether to believe the documented evidence or Jessica's increasingly frantic denials. Officer statements taken that night included testimony from multiple witnesses about the slideshow revelations and Jessica's inability to refute the financial documentation. Several guests provided statements supporting the authenticity of my evidence. Jessica's attempt to flee to Europe the next day was blocked when airport security detained her due to outstanding fraud warrants. Brandon's family had worked quickly with law enforcement to file criminal charges based on the comprehensive evidence I'd provided. She was arrested at the airport with fake pregnancy padding in her luggage and fraudulent medical documents in her possession. The aftermath of the reception was swift and devastating for my family's reputation in the community. Photos and videos from the event spread on social media, showing Jessica's breakdown and my parents' inability to deny the documented evidence of their crimes. Their lies about my mental health were exposed as projection designed to hide their own criminal behavior. Within a week of the reception, my parents' house was under foreclosure proceedings initiated by Brandon's family lawyers. The fraudulent refinancing was being investigated by federal authorities, and criminal charges were pending for identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The house I'd saved through 3 years of sacrifice was going to be sold to pay legal judgments against my family. 6 months after the truth was finally exposed, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined during the darkest period of family betrayal. The legal settlement process took several months to resolve, but the outcome exceeded my hopes for justice and financial recovery. Brandon's family lawyers had pursued both criminal charges and civil litigation with the resources and determination of people who'd been personally victimized by elaborate fraud. The house my parents had tried to steal from me through years of deception was ultimately sold through court order, with proceeds distributed according to my documented contributions. After legal fees and outstanding debts were paid, I received 60% of the sale price, totaling approximately $180,000. This amount covered my original financial contributions plus interest, legal costs, and compensation for the credit damage I'd suffered. My parents were required to sell their remaining assets to satisfy the civil judgment, including Dad's classic car collection and Mom's jewelry that hadn't already been liquidated for wedding expenses. They faced federal criminal charges for identity theft and financial fraud that resulted in probation and community service, along with restitution payments that would continue for years. Their reputation in the community was permanently destroyed. Jessica's situation was more severe because her crimes included fraud against Brandon and his family in addition to the conspiracy against me. She served 6 months in county jail for criminal fraud, followed by 2 years of supervised probation with requirements to pay restitution to both Brandon and me. Her acting career in Los Angeles was over, and she returned to our hometown to work as a server while making court-ordered payments. The relationship between my parents and me required extensive family therapy to rebuild any foundation of trust. They were required by the court settlement to attend counseling sessions where they had to acknowledge their crimes and the devastating impact of their favoritism and financial abuse. The process was painful but necessary for them to understand how their actions had nearly destroyed my life. Mom's journey through therapy was particularly difficult because she had to confront her role in creating the family dynamics that led to such extreme favoritism. She'd spent years enabling Jessica's irresponsibility while taking advantage of my reliability, creating a pattern where my sacrifices were expected and Jessica's selfishness was rewarded. Breaking these patterns required acknowledging decades of harmful choices. Dad's recovery from his stroke had been real, but his willingness to manipulate sympathy about his condition for financial gain was a betrayal that required serious examination. He had to admit that his health problems had been exploited as weapons against my legitimate concerns about money and recognition. Rebuilding trust meant separating his actual medical needs from his manipulative behavior. The extended family relationships were gradually repaired as the truth about my mental health and the false accusations spread throughout our relatives. People who'd been told I was obsessive and delusional reached out to apologize for believing lies about my character. Several family members admitted they'd suspected something was wrong with my parents' version of events but hadn't wanted to get involved in family drama. My professional life flourished once the personal stress was resolved and my mental health stabilized. The crisis management firm where I worked recognized my unique expertise in handling family financial abuse cases, and I became their lead consultant for clients experiencing similar situations. My personal experience gave me credibility and understanding that formal training couldn't provide. Tom Richardson and I had developed a close friendship during the legal battle, and that friendship gradually grew into a romantic relationship built on mutual respect and shared values about honesty and financial responsibility. Unlike my previous relationship with Michael, Tom had witnessed my family's manipulation firsthand and understood the complexity of family trauma. Our relationship was based on complete transparency and trust. The new apartment I was able to afford in Chicago was everything I'd dreamed of during the years of financial sacrifice. Large windows overlooked Lake Michigan, the kitchen was perfect for hosting dinner parties, and I had space for a home office where I could work on writing a book about recognizing and escaping family financial abuse. The apartment represented the life I'd almost lost to family manipulation. Mrs. Chen remained a close friend and surrogate grandmother figure, often joining Tom and me for Sunday dinners where she'd share stories about watching our family drama unfold from her front window. Her willingness to document the truth and testify on my behalf had been crucial to exposing my family's crimes. She often reminded me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish when you're being systematically abused. The book I wrote about my experience, titled The Favorite Child's Price, Surviving Family Financial Abuse, became a resource for other people experiencing similar manipulation. Readers from around the world contacted me to share their stories of family members who exploited their generosity, manipulated their guilt, and stole their financial futures. The book helped establish support networks for victims of family financial abuse. Speaking engagements about family financial abuse became part of my advocacy work, helping people recognize warning signs of manipulation and providing strategies for protecting themselves while maintaining family relationships when possible. I emphasized that loving family members don't systematically exploit each other's generosity or lie about their financial needs and intentions. The most healing aspect of my recovery was discovering that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish or vindictive. For years, my family had convinced me that expecting honesty, fairness, and recognition was evidence of greed and jealousy. Learning to set boundaries and demand respect was essential for building healthy relationships going forward. Self-advocacy became a form of self-love. Forgiveness was a complex process that didn't mean forgetting or enabling continued harmful behavior. I was able to forgive my parents for their crimes while maintaining boundaries that protected me from future manipulation. Forgiveness meant releasing the anger that was poisoning my own happiness, not pretending their actions hadn't been devastating or criminal. The financial security I'd regained through the legal settlement allowed me to pursue goals I'd abandoned during years of family crisis. I was able to contribute to retirement accounts, build an emergency fund, and plan for purchasing my own home within 2 years. Most importantly, I was able to help other people without sacrificing my own well-being or enabling destructive behavior. Today, 3 years after the truth was exposed, my life reflects the values of honesty, fairness, and mutual respect that I'd always believed family relationships should embody. My parents and I have a cautious relationship based on acknowledgement of past wrongs and commitment to different behavior. Jessica and I have no contact, which is healthier for both of us given the depth of manipulation and betrayal that occurred. The greatest lesson I learned from this experience is that family love doesn't require accepting abuse, manipulation, or financial exploitation. True family members want each other to thrive and succeed, not to sacrifice their futures for someone else's comfort or convenience. Recognizing the difference between loving support and enabling destruction is essential for maintaining both family relationships and personal well-being. Looking back, I understand that my family's behavior was a pattern of emotional and financial abuse that escalated over years until it nearly destroyed my life completely. Breaking free from that pattern required courage, legal support, and the willingness to accept that some people will choose manipulation over honesty even when confronted with consequences. Recovery meant building new relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. For anyone experiencing similar family manipulation, my advice is to document everything, seek outside support from people who aren't emotionally invested in maintaining family peace, and remember that protecting yourself from abuse isn't betraying your family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for manipulative family members is to stop enabling their harmful behavior by setting firm boundaries and demanding accountability. The house where my childhood memories were made and my financial future was nearly destroyed has been purchased by a young family with children who play in the backyard where Jessica's fraudulent wedding reception took place. Driving past occasionally, I feel peace knowing that my sacrifices ultimately helped create a home for people who will build honest, loving memories there. The property has been redeemed from its history of deception and manipulation. My story isn't unique, but it has a unique ending because I found the courage to fight for justice and the resources to pursue legal remedies. Many people experiencing family financial abuse don't have access to the legal help I received or the documentation I was able to compile. Creating awareness about these issues helps more people recognize manipulation and seek appropriate help before their lives are completely destroyed. Have you ever experienced favoritism or financial manipulation in your family? How did you handle situations where family members took advantage of your generosity? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your experiences might help someone else recognize warning signs or find courage to set boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthy relationships. Share this with anyone who might be struggling with family manipulation because awareness is the first step toward protection. Thank you for listening to my journey from financial exploitation to justice and healing. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for building authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. May your families be built on honesty, fairness, and genuine love that doesn't require anyone to lose themselves in the process.